Ambassador Yovanovitch, this is, it's really an honor and pleasure to have you. You and I have had many conversations about where we are in the war in Ukraine. And we also, for those of you who are really interested in a real great analysis on where we are in the battlefield, thinking about the implications, what's coming, and I recommend the event that we held, was it March? February, through IGP. It's on the website that featured great experts, member of our faculty. But I want to start today with, maybe we can just start by, if you can give us an update, how are things going on in Ukraine in the battlefield, and also now with the aid package that was approved, how do you see things moving from now on?
So thank you. And it's really a pleasure to be here with all of you today, and an honor to be an IGP fellow. I can't tell you, I've spent, if I may just say a few words.
Of course.
I've spent the last week in residence, which is a really grand way of saying that I've had an opportunity to interact not only with Keren and some of the amazing faculty and staff here, but also most importantly with the students. And the students are amazing. And, you have and others have very kindly thanked me for being here, but in fact, I got much more out of it. Not only in terms of, the intellectual stimulation, right, of being in a place of academic learning, and the students asked really great questions that I didn't have really great answers to, because, they're on it. They know what the issues are and how to formulate those thoughts. I would just say that being around the students was energizing and uplifting, because it gives me hope for the future, that this is the group of leaders, as we've been talking about all day, that is going to move forward and follow in your footsteps as leaders in various different areas. So it's really been a privilege to be here this week with all of you. So turning to Ukraine, which often can be uplifting, but at the moment, I think it's fair to say the situation is dire. We've had Chris Cavoli, the Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, tell us that 2 weeks ago in his congressional testimony. CIA Director Bill Burns said that if we don't get assistance to Ukraine, it is likely that the Ukrainian military will be defeated by December, or at least that the conditions will be in place for Vladimir Putin to dictate the peace as opposed to an actual peace negotiation. And then we have, no less an authority than President Zelensky himself saying basically the same thing, that unless there's American assistance pretty damn fast, Ukraine will be defeated. So that is not something I ever thought that I would see. I mean, even in the early days, I just believed, I knew the Ukrainians were going to fight back. I knew they were going to surprise us, and they did. And they inspired, not only each other, but they inspired the world. And yet, here we are, all these, over 2 years later, and, I see the headlines about the Ukrainian military flagging and failing. And I would say, they're not failing. We've been failing, because we're not providing the assistance that they need to succeed, not only for Ukraine itself, but for, that old term, the free world, which includes, of course, us. So it's I think it's fair to say it's a desperate situation where you have people in trenches not being able to fire back. I mean, can you imagine that situation where the official figures are that Russia has a 10-to-1 advantage in terms of firepower, but I would suspect that that is vastly underestimated. One of my former bodyguards in Ukraine was in the military in the early days, which is what this reminds me of now, where they also didn't have enough to fire back. And he described that, and I won't do that for you here, but terrifying, just terrifying to be under constant assault and not be able to defend yourself. So, there are a couple of rays of hope. One is the Ukrainian people themselves. the Ukrainian military first and foremost, but actually the Ukrainian people also, who, I mean, this is a country, this is a nation, this is a people that knows why they are fighting. They are fighting for their freedom, they are fighting for their families, they're fighting for the future. They know that this is an existential fight. They know that if they give up or are defeated, that they will, Ukraine as a country, but also as a people, will be eradicated, because what the Russians are trying to do is Russify that part of the world. And we can see that most clearly and most heartbreakingly with the children of Ukraine, where it's unclear what the actual numbers are of children that have been kidnapped, taken to Russia, and basically brainwashed. And we're talking about, some kids who are so small that they are never going to know that they are Ukrainian. They are never going to remember the Ukrainian language. They don't know that there are families who love them in Ukraine. A handful has been able to be liberated, and with mothers and grandmothers bravely going to Moscow to try to get those children back. And so a handful have been released. But in terms of the figures, the Ukrainians have a pretty modest figure of how many children have been kidnapped. The Russians themselves, in a report last summer, so almost a year ago now, said that they had taken 700,000 children to Russia. And this may include children that came with their families, so the whole family was taken. But that is an incredible and terrible number when you consider that this is the future and the flower of Ukraine, right? So the Ukrainians really know why they are fighting. And so I don't believe that they are going to give up. In conversations I have with people, they're worried. They're desperately worried, but they think, they also know that they can't really give up, and we can perhaps talk about what that looks like a little bit. But I would say the other ray of hope is Europe, which has really stepped up. And then the third ray of hope is the movement in Congress this week, where, as probably most of you know, Speaker Johnson has disaggregated some of the bills, and there are 4 bills moving forward in tandem, if tandem is the right word. Yesterday there was a vote on the procedural motions. Today we expect there to be discussion and an actual vote, and I've talked to a member of Congress, and I think it looks pretty good that that vote will move forward. The Senate has already signaled that they can quickly pass it. And so, and actually our military has indicated that they are ready to speed that assistance to Ukraine. So what does that get us? I mean, it gets Ukraine, or I should say Ukraine, it allows Ukraine space and time. Mm-hmm. It's not the end of the war. It's not, the decisive thing that, for the last 2 years people have said, is it planes? Is it defensive equipment? What is the thing that is going to put Ukraine over the top? Well, it's all of those things. But right now, what Ukraine needs is space and time to regroup, to rest some of their soldiers. That, as you know, the demographics do not work in Ukraine's favor. To rearm, to build really strong defenses, and to think about how they can put together a counteroffensive in next year, in 2025. So I think I will leave it at that, and perhaps you have more questions.
No, so sometimes I get, this question from our students who wonder, so, okay, the war is not going that well. Should the United States then urge President Zelensky to initiate peace talks with Russia, given where we are in the war? And if not, then can you make the case of why not?
Yeah. So I think it's really important that we acknowledge that countries get to make their own decisions about not only their internal politics, but also their external policies and what they think is important and how they want to move forward. Now, clearly, there are certain countries, Ukraine being one of them, that are hugely dependent on international assistance for what they're doing. But they make their own decisions, and I think that we need, separate from Russia, and in distinction, a huge difference from Russia, that we aren't going to dictate those terms about what is in Ukraine's national security. I think that's really important. And just a word about what Ukraine is doing now. Ukraine, if there's anybody, any country in the world, any people in the world that wants this war to stop, it's Ukrainians, because they're the ones that are fighting and dying. I don't know a single family in Ukraine that hasn't been, affected by the war, either with somebody hurt or somebody killed. And so it's a national issue for everybody. I mean, nobody gets to hide from this one. And so they all want peace too, far more than we do. And so Zelensky in November of 22, so less than a year before, after the war started, he put out a 10-point peace plan. And he is still working that with his people. There have been a number of conferences, international conferences. There's one coming up June 15, 16 that the Swiss are hosting. And, let's see what happens with all of that. But, the dirty little secret when people say, well, we really need to, force Ukraine to the table, is that the Russians are not interested in peace talks right now. They've made very clear that they believe the momentum is on their side, with some justification there. And secondly, that they are waiting for November to see what happens, not in their elections, but in our elections. And so, there's no motivation there to move forward with peace talks.
We also, a theme that we've looked at, and definitely next year will be a big part of what we do at SIPA, is looking at elections around the world. And next year, this year, 2024, we will have half of the world's population will be voting. And of course, if you think about AI, you think about elections, you put, the concept of actors like Russia trying to use technologies and different ways to manipulate and interfere in elections. And we have elections not in the United States and in many European countries. So, Masha, what do you think, governments or non-governmental actors can do to prevent or be more effective at countering Russia's interference in elections around the world? What can we do?
Yeah, this is such an important conversation, and it's, I think the bottom line is that right now we are way behind the Russians in terms of disinformation, being able to get our message out there and also being able to counter it. And it's not just Russia. Some of you may have seen Timothy Snyder, who's a professor of history at Yale, who was actually also at that conference at SIPA in February, who is just a brilliant, brilliant mind. I mean, I would recommend every single book that he's written, but he is very eloquent on this issue of disinformation, and actually just testified within the last week, maybe even last week, on disinformation and Russian disinformation. And he notes that, the way it works is it'll be like in a story, a lie will be in some little local Russian newspaper, and then it gets picked up and picked up and picked up. The Chinese pick it up, the French pick it up. By the time it gets into your, either into the New York Times or into your social media feed, you have no idea where it came from. But all you see is all of this, hubbub about this particular issue. And it's very hard to parse it back. And the really tricky thing about this is that somehow the way our brains are wired is we remember the first thing that we are told. And even if it is explained to us that this is wrong and this is what the truth is, 6 months later, what do we remember? We don't remember the corrected version. We remember that first thing. And so it is super, super insidious. And we've got, the Russians who have been doing this, well, since the Soviet era, certainly, but they have been doing this with a vengeance for the last 20 years, we saw in our elections and other elections back in 2016. We are seeing it now as well, where the Russians, through that method, through thousands of bot farms, where they're just seeding the information field here in the United States and Europe, because there are EU elections that are very important that are coming up. They're putting all sorts of information out there. They have certain goals. It's very clear that they want to divide our societies against ourselves. They want to destroy support for Ukraine. They want to weaken NATO. It's very clear what they want. And actually, one of the places you can go is a recently. Don't ask me how they got it, but the New York Times. Or was it the Washington? Now I'm forgetting. But there is a newspaper article, either in the Post or the Times, about the classified annex to the Russian foreign ministry's communications goals. And in that classified annex, they put out all of this stuff, which I think we all knew, but there it was in Russian, and with the foreign ministry's logo. Mm-hmm. So it's clear what they're trying to do. They're not necessarily trying to get us to think of one truth, but they're trying to confuse us and to make us give up and to think that any action, any attempt to sort of figure out what the truth is, they're all, all politicians are alike. To sort of be hopeless about the idea of, being able to take action, being able to fix our world, and being able to meet our needs. And it's very, very insidious. And we can see that those Russian talking points have been very effective in terms of the conversation we in the United States are having as to whether or not we should be supporting Ukraine. And there are certainly, we can have a big, robust debate about that, but we shouldn't be taking Russian talking points as, the other side of, not supporting Ukraine. And don't take my word for it. The Republican head of the Defense Committee and the Republican head of the Intel Committee in the House have noted the same thing 2 weeks ago, that Russian talking points have become part of the conversation among certain House members. Very, very dangerous. And alarming. And the same thing, of course, is true with regard to our elections. Again, you can make all sorts of arguments for either candidate, right? But again, it should be an internal American discussion, not something that is influenced by foreign powers.
Absolutely. And again, this is a topic that we will take on even more in our programming and in our studying next year on the issue of AI, disinformation, interference, and all of that. And yeah,
if I may say, you asked me what we can do about it, and I admired the problem, and I didn't actually come up with solutions.
I love it.
That's a Bill Burns term. And I would say, again, I don't have a good answer for that question, but I think it's something we need to put a lot of attention to. And I think the most important thing is, many of us are old enough to have been in classes, in grade school and on up, that emphasize the idea of critical thinking in terms of thinking about, where you're not. I can see heads nodding, so I'm not going to go into what that actually means. Sometimes with younger audiences, not that everybody here isn't young and bushy-tailed, but you have to actually explain what that is, because we no longer really have it as part of a thing. And I think from grade school on up, we need to focus on that. That's the long term. The shorter term is we just need to get our own messaging geared up and effective.
Absolutely, we can go for hours talking. Yes. I mean, and you will have more opportunities to hear from Ambassador Yovanovitch and others on this issue. I just want to first thank you so much for being with us, for all the work that you've done, And I know we have to go because you have a lot of other things happening later today. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks a lot.